Hello, stranger. Would you like to hear a scary story? Press the subscribe and like buttons and enjoy the story. Dracula's Castle Curse, The Arrival. Nightfall over Transylvania. Deep in the heart of Transylvania, beyond forests so dense that sunlight barely touched the ground, stood the ancient fortress known as Castle Poenary, the stronghold most whispered about in connection to Vlad Tepes, the ruler whose cruelty gave rise to the timeless legend of Dracula. The villagers who lived in the scattered settlements below the mountains rarely spoke of the castle, and when they did, it was only in hushed tones, never after sunset. For generations, they believed the land around the fortress was cursed, that the stones of the castle absorbed the pain and blood of those who died there, and that the walls themselves remembered every scream. On a cold autumn evening, a foreign traveler named Adrian Hale arrived in the village. He was a historian, fascinated by dark folklore, convinced that most legends were born from exaggeration. His goal was simple: spend one night inside Dracula's castle and document the truth. But as he walked through the village streets, he noticed something unsettling. Every window was shut, every door locked. Not a single lantern burned outside. The entire village felt abandoned, until an elderly woman slowly opened her door just enough to speak through the crack. Her voice trembled. "Do not go up that mountain, traveler. The curse doesn't sleep. It only waits." Before he could reply, she closed the door, sliding multiple locks into place. A sudden gust of cold wind swept through the village, carrying with it the faint smell of wet earth and something metallic. Adrian took a deep breath and continued toward the forest trail. He told himself the villagers were simply superstitious, but deep inside, something felt wrong. Something was watching. The path to the fortress. The forest of silent pines. The trail leading to the castle was narrow, winding along steep cliffs and surrounded by towering pine trees. The sun had already set, and the sky turned a deep blue, fading quickly into darkness. As Adrian climbed higher, a strange silence overtook the forest. No birds, no insects, no rustling of leaves, just the sound of his footsteps and the distant rumble of thunder. A thick fog began to roll in, sweeping across the mountain path. At first, it was thin, harmless, but within minutes, it became dense enough that Adrian could barely see a few meters ahead. Then he heard it, a whisper carried by the wind. It wasn't Romanian. It wasn't English. It was something ancient, a dialect older than the villages themselves. The whisper repeated, faint but firm. "Întoarce-te," turn back. He froze. The fog swirled around him, cold and heavy. But after a moment, Adrian forced himself to continue. He was too close to turn back now. Lightning flashed across the sky, illuminating the cliffs and the outline of the massive castle in the distance. And for a split second, he saw a tall figure standing at the top of the stone steps leading to the gates. But when the lightning faded, the figure was gone. The gates of the castle. A warning too late. When Adrian finally reached the front gates, he was surprised to find them slightly open, creaking in the wind as if inviting him in. He placed his hand on the cold iron surface. Another flash of lightning illuminated the courtyard for a brief moment, and he saw shapes, shadows, moving across the walls, even though nothing was physically there. The storm grew stronger. Rain began to fall lightly at first, then harder, echoing across the stone like distant drums. With a deep breath, Adrian stepped inside. The heavy gates slowly shut behind him with a loud, echoing thud. He turned around instantly. There were no chains, no ropes, no mechanism, but the doors had sealed him in. The air grew colder. The smell of wet stone mixed with something older, a faint metallic scent, like dried blood. He whispered to himself, just old wood and wind, but his voice sounded strangely small in the vast, empty courtyard. And then, the first clear whisper drifted through the air, soft but unmistakable. Blood returns home. Adrian spun around. No one, nothing, only the endless stone walls watching him silently. Yet a shiver ran down his spine, because deep inside, he felt it. This place wasn't abandoned. It was waiting for him. Inside the fortress, the awakening of the shadows. The moment Adrian crossed the threshold into the castle's interior, the temperature dropped sharply. His breath became visible in the air, forming pale clouds with every exhale. The storm outside muffled itself into a distant hum, as though the walls of the fortress swallowed sound, keeping the world outside at bay. The corridor before him was long and narrow, lit only by the occasional flash of lightning that slipped through broken windows. The stone walls were damp, covered in patches of dark moss. Water dripped slowly from the ceiling, echoing through the silence like the rhythmic tapping of a clock. Adrian clicked on his flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, but the light felt weak, almost hesitant, as though the castle itself resisted illumination. He moved forward carefully, his footsteps echoing deep into the hall. Then he noticed something strange. His shadow was slightly off. When he lifted his hand, the shadow followed, but a fraction of a second too late. When he stopped walking, the shadow took one extra step before stopping. He froze. The shadow froze too, but now it was standing just half a step closer to him. A pulse of cold filled the hallway. He felt something unseen press against the back of his neck, like icy breath. He swallowed hard. "It's just the lighting," he whispered. But even he didn't believe that. The Great Hall, a chamber that remembers. The corridor opened into a massive chamber, the largest room in the castle. This was the Great Hall, where Vlad the Impaler had once held feasts, meetings, and executions. Adrian shined his light around. The hall was vast, with broken pillars, fallen stones, and long tables decayed by centuries of neglect. Torn banners depicting ancient symbols still hung from the ceiling, swaying slightly although the air was completely still. But what caught his eye was the long, dark stain stretching across the floor from the center of the hall to the northern wall. It looked like a dried river of something dark. The villagers' stories whispered in his mind. This is where the blood flowed. He crouched down and touched the surface. The stone was unusually cold. A thunderclap shook the castle. And then Adrian heard a faint murmur behind him. He turned instantly, raising the flashlight. Nothing. The murmur came again, louder this time, like a dozen voices whispering at once. The sound seemed to come from everywhere. The walls, the floor, the ceiling. Whispers, layered upon whispers, overlapping in different tones, in different languages. His heart raced. Then, without warning, lightning flashed. And in that brief, blinding moment, he saw them. Silhouettes of men and women standing in the hall. Dozens of them. Their bodies twisted, their faces blurred, their forms pale like smoke. Some were kneeling. Some were crawling. Some hung by chains from the pillars. Some had no faces at all, and all of them were staring at him. The light faded. The hall was empty again, except for one whisper, clearer than the rest, spoken in a voice that sounded like stone cracking. "He still rules here. The portrait chamber. Eyes that follow. Adrian forced himself to keep moving. He needed evidence, recordings, anything to prove that something truly supernatural existed here. He entered a smaller chamber lined with old portraits. Each painting depicted a noble figure from centuries past. Stern men, cold women, all dressed in medieval garments. But as he walked through the room, he felt something wrong. He turned to the nearest portrait. The man's painted eyes were staring directly at him. Adrian moved to the right. The eyes followed. He stepped to the left. Again, they followed. He lifted his flashlight to inspect the painting more closely. Suddenly, a pair of eyes blinked inside the portrait. Adrian stumbled back, tripping over debris on the floor. The portrait's expression had changed, subtle but unmistakable. The lips curved downward slightly, forming a frown. He shined the light across the room. One by one, every portrait was shifting. Faces changed. Frowns deepened. Eyes narrowed with hatred, as though the spirits trapped inside these canvases disapproved of his presence. Then a deep, slow whisper filled the room. "You should not have come." The portraits rattled violently. The frames shook. Dust fell from the ceiling. Adrian sprinted out of the chamber, his heart pounding so hard he could feel it in his throat. But as he entered the next hallway, something else caught his eye. His shadow was gone. It wasn't beneath him. It wasn't behind him. It had stayed in the portrait room. And now, something else was standing in its place. Dracula's Castle curse. The depths below. Where the damned still whisper. Adrian stood frozen in the hallway, staring at the stone floor beneath his feet. There was no shadow. The flashlight still worked. The walls still reflected light. But the place where his shadow should have been was empty. The air around him felt thick, as if the castle itself was pressing inward. His ears rang softly, a dull hum that grew louder the longer he stood still. Then he heard it, a faint sound, not footsteps, but dragging. Something was being pulled across stone, slowly, deliberately. The sound came from beneath the floor, the hidden staircase. Descent into the curse. Adrian followed the sound down the corridor until he reached a section of wall, covered in collapsed stone and dust. The dragging noise grew louder here, accompanied by low, broken murmurs. He brushed away debris with trembling hands. Behind it, a narrow stone staircase spiraled downward into complete darkness. A wave of cold air rushed upward, carrying with it the overwhelming stench of damp earth and decay. Every instinct in his body screamed to turn back. Instead, he stepped forward. The stone steps were uneven and slick with moisture. Water dripped from above, echoing endlessly as he descended. With each step, the murmurs grew clearer. They weren't random sounds. They were voices, dozens of them, whispering, crying, pleading. Some begged for mercy. Some screamed in rage. Some repeated the same words over and over again. He never let us die. The prison beneath the castle. At the bottom of the staircase, Adrian entered a vast underground chamber. Rows of iron-barred cells lined the walls, their doors hanging open, chains still attached, swaying gently though there was no wind. The floor was scratched deeply, as if countless hands had clawed at the stone in desperation. As Adrian stepped forward, the whispers stopped all at once. Silence. Then, a single voice spoke close to his ear. "Do you feel it now?" He spun around. Nothing. Suddenly, the chains rattled violently. One by one, hands emerged from the darkness inside the cells. Pale hands, thin hands, some missing fingers, some with bones exposed. They gripped the bars, pushing through impossibly. stretching and bending in ways no living body could. Faces followed, sunken eyes, torn flesh, mouths frozen mid-scream. Their voices merged into a chorus. He fed the land with us. Our blood sealed the stones. Now the land feeds on you. Adrian stumbled backward, gasping for air. The floor beneath him felt warm. He looked down. Fresh blood was seeping up through the cracks in the stone. The voice of Vlad. The chamber darkened suddenly, as if the light itself had been extinguished. Then came footsteps, slow, heavy, echoing. A tall shadow emerged from the far end of the chamber, broad-shouldered, crowned, draped in a long, unnatural cloak that seemed to move on its own. The shadow stopped a few feet from Adrian. A deep voice filled the chamber, vibrating through the stone walls. I did not die. The shadow raised its head. Its eyes ignited with a faint red glow. I was bound. The temperature dropped so sharply that frost spread across the walls. Adrian's chest burned. His heartbeat slowed unnaturally. The voice continued. My blood built this kingdom. My cruelty sealed the curse. And every soul that enters. The shadow stepped closer. Feeds it? The chains screamed as they tightened. The prisoners howled. And Adrian felt something tear inside him, as if a part of his soul was being pulled away. The mark of the curse. Pain shot through Adrian's arm. He looked down and screamed. A dark symbol was forming beneath his skin, an ancient mark etched in veins and blood. The shadow spoke again, softer now. You carry me now. A flash of lightning tore through the chamber, and suddenly, everything vanished. The cells, the chains, the prisoners. Adrian found himself lying on the stone floor of the upper hall, gasping for air. The storm outside still raged, but something inside him had changed. He stood slowly, shaking, and that's when he noticed something terrifying. His shadow had returned, but it was no longer shaped like him. The attempted escape. When the castle refuses to let go, Adrian staggered through the upper halls of the castle, his breath ragged, his thoughts fractured. The mark on his arm pulsed faintly beneath his skin, as if responding to something deep within the walls. The storm outside had grown violent. Rain battered the windows, and thunder shook the fortress so fiercely the dust fell from the ceilings. He had to leave. That single thought repeated in his mind like a desperate prayer. But the castle did not agree. Corridors that change. Adrian ran through a hallway he clearly remembered walking through earlier. Yet now, the walls seemed closer together, the ceiling lower. Doors appeared where none had been before. He opened one door and found himself back in the great hall. Panic surged. He turned and ran again, choosing another corridor. This time, the walls were lined with moving shadows, stretching unnaturally along the stone. They reached toward him, their fingers brushing the air inches from his face. The whispers returned, overlapping, frantic. Stay. It needs you. You belong to the mountain now. Adrian covered his ears, but the voices came from inside his head. The Hall of Echoes. Reality begins to break. He burst into a long chamber, filled with broken mirrors mounted along the walls. As lightning flashed, the mirrors reflected not his face, but dozens of different versions of him. Some were screaming, some were bleeding, some smiled with sharp, unnatural teeth. One reflection stepped closer to the glass and spoke, its mouth moving, but the voice echoed from everywhere. You carry the mark. The reflection's eyes darkened. You cannot leave whole. The mirrors shattered all at once. Glass exploded outward, slicing through the air. But none of it touched Adrian. Instead, the shards froze midair for a split second. then fell harmlessly to the ground. The castle was no longer hiding its power. The courtyard, freedom within reach. Adrian finally saw it. The courtyard gates, they stood open. Rain pouring through. Moonlight spilling across the stone floor. Like salvation, he ran toward them, his boots slipping on wet stone. With every step, the mark on his arm burned hotter. The whispers grew desperate now, angry. Do not flee. The blood has been accepted. Adrian crossed the threshold of the courtyard, and the gates slammed shut behind him. The iron doors sealed themselves with a deafening crash. Chains erupted from the stone walls, wrapping around the gates, locking them in place. The rain stopped instantly. The courtyard fell into an unnatural stillness. The shadow takes control. Adrian felt his body stiffen. His shadow stretched across the courtyard floor, growing taller, broader, crowned. He tried to move, but his legs refused to obey. A deep voice rose from his own chest. The land remembers. His reflection appeared in a puddle of rainwater at his feet. The face staring back at him was still his. But the eyes were no longer human. Red flickered within them. Adrian screamed, but the sound came out distorted, layered with another voice beneath it. You opened the gates. You accepted the mark. The shadow stepped away from his feet, standing on its own. It turned toward him, and for the first time, it smiled, a glimpse of the past. The courtyard dissolved. Adrian found himself standing in the same castle centuries earlier. Torches burned. Screams echoed. The air was thick with smoke and blood. He watched helplessly as prisoners were dragged across the courtyard, impaled upon towering stakes. At the center stood Vlad himself, not as a shadow, but as a man, cold, calm, watching. Vlad turned his head and looked directly at Adrian. Their eyes met, and Vlad spoke, his voice clear and absolute. History does not end. The vision shattered. Back to the storm. Adrian collapsed to his knees as the present snapped back into place. The gate slowly creaked open again. The rain returned. The whispers faded. He stood, trembling, unsure if the castle was finally releasing him or simply allowing him to leave. As he stumbled through the gates and down the mountain path, one terrifying realization settled in his mind. The mark was still there, and his shadow. It no longer followed him. The curse beyond the walls. Some never truly leave. Adrian did not remember how long he ran. The forest swallowed him whole. Branches clawed at his clothes. Wet leaves slid beneath his feet, and the rain poured endlessly from the blackened sky. Yet no matter how far he ran, the feeling never left him. The feeling that something was walking with him, not beside him, not behind him, but inside him. The descent, leaving the mountain. As the path finally leveled, the storm began to weaken. Thunder faded into distant echoes, and the rain softened into a slow, steady drizzle. Lights appeared ahead. The village. Warm, yellow lights spilling from windows. Smoke rising from chimneys. Life. Adrian collapsed at the edge of the road, gasping for breath. His body shook violently, his heart pounding, as if trying to escape his chest. He was alive. He had escaped, at least. That's what he wanted to believe. A villager found him moments later, wrapped him in a blanket, and helped him to a small house near the edge of the village. No one asked questions. No one needed to. They had seen this before. The first night away, Adrian lay on a wooden bed, staring at the ceiling as rain tapped gently against the window. His muscles ached. His mind replayed fragments of the castle. Chains, whispers, shadows, eyes glowing red. He rolled up his sleeve. The mark was still there. Dark veins traced an ancient symbol beneath his skin, pulsing faintly, slowly, like a heartbeat that was not his own. He turned toward the window and froze. His shadow stretched across the wall, too tall, too still. It did not move when he shifted. A soft whisper filled the room. Distance does not break the bond. The oil lamp flickered violently. The shadow raised its head. The reflection. Adrian rushed to the small mirror hanging beside the door. His reflection stared back at him. Normal. Human. Relieved, he exhaled until the reflection smiled. He did not. The reflection leaned closer to the glass. Its voice was low, calm, familiar. The castle was only the beginning. Cracks spread across the mirror like veins. Adrian stumbled backward as the glass shattered, falling to the floor in silence. The room went cold. The whisper returned, closer now, inside his skull. You are the door now. Days later, the curse spreads. Adrian left the village at dawn. He told himself it was over, that the castle had released him. But wherever he went, strange things followed. Animals avoided him. People felt uneasy around him without knowing why. Mirrors reflected shadows that didn't belong. At night, he dreamed of stone corridors and iron chains. And sometimes, he woke up standing, facing north, toward the mountains. The final realization. Weeks later, Adrian stood alone in a crowded city street. People rushed past him unaware, safe, or so they thought. A sudden reflection caught his eye in a dark shop window. Behind him stood a tall figure, wearing a crown of shadow. No one else noticed. The figure leaned close to the glass and spoke, not to Adrian, but to the world beyond. Blood built the castle. Fear keeps it alive. And now, I walk freely. Adrian felt his body go numb. He understood then. The curse had never been about the castle. The castle was a prison, and he had become the key. The last scene. Some say Dracula's castle still stands silent in the mountains of Romania. But others claim the true curse no longer waits behind stone walls. It walks among us. It watches from reflections. It listens in the sound of rain tapping against your window late at night. And if you feel, for just a moment, that your shadow moves on its own, it may already be too late.